Hello everyone, so today I'm doing challenge activity 9.9.2, modify an array parameter. So the question is, write a method swap array ends that swaps the first and last elements of its array parameter. For example, sort array 10, 20, 34 becomes 40, 20, 30, 10. So all it wants us to do is we take an array and we put the last element at the beginning and we put the first element at the end. So the 40 goes to the beginning and the 10 goes to the end. Okay? So let me look at this. So we'll have an array which is an exact length array. So there's two different ways that you can write array methods, right? You can have a method that's static. I guess in this case it would be void. Swap array ends. And then you'd have your array, so int input. And this would be one way to have your function. And another way to do it would be with int length. Now what's the difference? With this one, we're going to totally rely on the length part of the input array. So we'll have our input array, and we can do input.length to get the length of the array. But sometimes you don't know how big of an array you're going to need before you create it. So sometimes you'll create an array, let's say you'll have like int my array equals new int 50, or let's do 10 just to make it easier. So that will initialize an array with 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Kind of regretting I picked 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Right, it'll initialize them all to 0. But let's say that we set this to be 10 just to be safe as a maximum we can possibly use, and then we only use 3 of them. So we would set this one to 3, 2, and 5. Well, in that case, we have to pass the length as well, because the length of this array, if we try to get like my array the length, this is going to give us 10. But really, we only have 3 elements. So we need a separate length, array length or whatever name, variable holding how many of the elements of the array we used. So if we have an array where we're not using every single element, I forget the exact name that they use. It's like an imperfect, I guess it's just an imperfect size array. Then in that case, we would have an extra length input. But in this case, we're going to have a perfect size array, so we don't need that. We can rely entirely off of the length that's built into the array. Does that make sense? So that's the first thing that I'm thinking about. The second thing is that if I'm going to change something in this array, why am I returning void? Now, arrays work particularly differently than okay, so in your programming language there's different types of variables. There's primitives, which would be your int, bool, it's called boolean, char, long, float, double, short, I think it's like byte. Right? These are your primitives. Now, when you have pressed a primitive to a function, it creates a copy of the value of the primitive. So let's say that this is just some method and our input is an integer. Right? If we in the function set input equals 5, this only changes, this is very important, this only changes the copy inside of this method. Where whatever we put in, like if we had like some other function somewhere else where we put we called some method with my variable, right? And this happened to be equal to 7 or something. And we go into this function and we set it equal to 5. We're not setting my variable equal to 5. We're only setting the local copy called input to 5. Okay, you follow me so far? So, other than primitives, we have reference variables. And this is your arrays. This would be objects created from classes. This is wrapper classes, like big I integer, or well, let's do some examples like int array would be a reference variable, or if we do integer with a capital, I don't know if we cover this in this chapter or the next chapter, but integer with a capital, my wrapped int, that's also a reference. Or if we have like the string class, if we have a string, my string, those are all references. So when you pass a reference variable into a function, so again, if we have we call some method with an array, like an int array, and this takes an array. Now, if we set the element at 0 of input to 5, this does change my array. This actually changes what we input into the function. There's no local copy. The only thing that's copied here is the reference to where this array is in memory. So since the reference, we have a local copy of the reference, but the reference still points to the same area in memory where we have the data, which is actually inside the array. So our array, if we set input 0 to 5, we're actually changing the input. Okay, so very different. So let's put it down here. Primitives methods cannot directly change the contents. References methods can directly change the contents. Very important. So we can just make this a comment, so we can just leave it here, right? Okay. So what is the question actually trying to ask us to do? So now we know that if we have a reference variable like an array, we can change the contents of it. It becomes very simple. We don't have to return anything for this method. We can just change the array directly, and it will make the change in the sort array that we input. So let's create our method swap array ends, and we're doing a swap. So we need a temp variable. So we'll create an int temp, and yes, this is an integer array. So we have a temp. We're going to, and then we're going to do the classic swap algorithm. So we set temp equal to the element at the 0th location of the array. Now we set the element at the end of this array to input 0. Wait. No, we set the element at the beginning, because that's the one we got the temp for, to the element at the end of the array. And then we set the element at the end of the array to temp. Okay, so there's two things going on here. First is this is the swapping algorithm. So let's say we just had an array. I wish they would just let you edit anywhere, but whatever. Let's say we just had an array which was an array with 2 elements. So there's elements 5 and 7. Well, let's say we want to swap these. We want to put 7 here where 5 is and 5 where 7 is. Well, we can't just put 7 in 5 like here and then try and put the 5 back in the 7. We lost the 5. We actually overwrote it. So what we need to do is take the 5, copy it to our temp, which is our location somewhere over here. Then we can copy the 7 over to the 5. Then we copy the 5 over to the 7. Right? Like that. So that's basically what the swapping algorithm is trying to do. So this should just work unless I did something wrong. Oh, and the other thing that's going on is that, remember that we don't take an length in this function. We're just using the length built into the array. So you can do the array name dot length to get its length. And remember that arrays go from 0, 1, or start at 0 and go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to length -1. They don't actually go to the length. If you put in the length, that will be out of bounds of the array. So for a array of length 5, it goes from 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Right? So to access the last element of an array, we just have to give it the length -1. And the first element of the array is always 0. So this should always work. So let's compile this and see if I got it wrong. Yep, and that works. So that was a very long-winded way of explaining this, but I wanted to go in-depth on every single little thing that was going on in this question. So I hope that helps, and yeah, if you have any questions, just leave them underneath, or hit me up during class or after class or whatever. And thank you. Thank you for watching.